Mathematicians call this pattern the torus. The energy in a torus flows in through one end, circulates around the center, and exits out the other side. It's balanced, self-regulating, and always whole. I was first officially introduced to the torus by scientist and inventor Arthur Young. Futurist Dwayne Elgin explains how the torus is the primary pattern that nature uses for life at every scale.
Evolution means to unfold, to roll out. So the question is, what is the universe rolling out? And what the universe is rolling out is self-organizing systems, and you can see this at every scale. A self-organizing system is a technical term for just a system getting a hold of itself, knowing itself, essentially. And if we go to nature, we can look at and we can see these self-organizing forms throughout. We can see it in the cross-section of an orange, the cross-section of an apple. We can see it in the dynamic nature of a tornado. We can see it in the magnetic field around the Earth, a similar magnetic field around an individual. We can see it in the structure of an entire whirlpool galaxy. We can see it in the structure of a small atom. At every scale, throughout its entire history, the universe has one single project. It's growing toruses. The universe is a torus growing factory.
These toroidal dynamics are visible at various scales. One of them is at the galactic level, which are huge spinning structures with billions of stars in it. Looks like typically big arms of galaxies spinning around, and they have vortices that goes from the center out to the edge of the galactic halo that surrounds them. Stars move from this galactic disk out to the halo, down the vortices, and back out again. Stars like Arcturus, for instance, we know have done that path already. That's the appropriate description even for the atmosphere of our planet. The weather goes from the North Pole down to the equator and then back up, from the South Pole up to the equator and then back down. Even the dynamics on the surface of the sun are very similar. Of course, here we're looking at it from an external perspective on a small scale model. When you look at the solar system embedded in the galaxy, embedded in the cluster, embedded in the supercluster, we're traveling in this boundless sea of infinite torus flow.
The torus is like the breath of the universe. It's the form that the flow of energy takes at every scale of existence. But there's also an underlying structure in how the flow fits together, sort of like a skeleton. It's called the vector equilibrium, a term coined by one of the 20th century's greatest thinkers, Buckminster Fuller. Inspired by Fuller's visionary work, I spent decades researching the dynamics of the vector equilibrium and the torus. I became so excited by the potential of the toroidal energy form that in 1997 I co-founded a multidisciplinary think tank called the Sequoia Symposium to study the pattern and explore its applications. Our collected research convinced me that the torus and the vector equilibrium are primary patterns, fundamental to the creation of the universe at all scales. At the Sequoia Symposium gatherings, I learned of inventors who claimed they were using the torus dynamic as the basis for devices that generated energy without combustion. This revolutionary development, accessing what's sometimes called zero point or radiant or free energy, is now being called most simply new energy technology. Given that so much of the suffering in our world is the result of lack of access to energy, I realized that free, unlimited, clean energy would be one of the greatest breakthroughs in history. It could not just improve, but actually transform the quality of life on this planet. So I began to wonder who else knew about this pattern, or about this powerful potential energy source. Some of the scientists at the symposium showed me how the torus has been encoded by different cultures for millennia. Apparently, ancient cultures had embedded this code in the most enduring forms then possible, in stories, in icons, in alphabets, and buildings. Here we are at one of the world's oldest sacred sites, the Osirian Temple at Abydos, Egypt.
Very little writing is found in the Osirian Temple. However, there is one very significant piece of information in that temple. It is a very faint but clear and precise drawing. It's not etched into the rock, it's not carved, it's burnt into the atomic structure of the rock in some extraordinary way.
Nassim has decoded the Osirian symbol in 3 dimensions. Since our world is not two-dimensional, it makes sense that codes relaying information about our world also wouldn't be limited to flat designs. His 3-dimensional version of the Osirian symbol starts with the vector equilibrium, a perfectly balanced force field with 12 equal energy lines radiating out. They stabilize its center like the 12 spokes of a wheel. The primary pattern of balanced energy flow around this structure is the torus. Here we expand to the next larger scale with a total of 64 pyramids called tetrahedra. If we then put spheres in representing the toroidal energy field surrounding each of the pyramids, and then we drop away the pyramids, we end up with a matrix that is, amazingly, an exact overlay for the Osirian icon, a 3-dimensional model of the same pattern that was burned into the rock wall of the Egyptian temple thousands of years ago. Now we travel across continents, from Egypt to China, where the same geometry appears at another sacred site built in 1420.
Then you go to the Forbidden City, where the sun gods reside, and where you find at the entrance the food dogs, the guardians of the knowledge. They guard the knowledge under their paw.
The same geometry of 64 energy units is encoded again. I started wondering, is it just a coincidence that the exact same design appears in significant places on 2 different continents? But then Nassim showed me that this geometry of 64 is encoded time and again in cultures across the centuries and from all over the world. The Hebrew Kabbalistic tree of life creates the same structure we just saw, with the vector equilibrium again embedded at every level. The ancient Chinese system of wisdom called the I Ching is based on 64 hexagrams, symbols with 6 lines in a set, some continuous, some broken. These can be put together as the 6 edges of a tetrahedron, and together would form the 64 tetrahedron crystal. This same pattern shows up in modern scientific research. The double helix has an alphabet of 64 codons that are used to encode our human DNA. I had seen that there was advanced knowledge of the living geometry of the universe thousands of years ago, but how on earth did they know about it?
Most of the stories of ancient Egypt and Mayan and Incas talk about sun gods coming to the earth and teaching them engineering and writing and all of their science. I started to wonder if all these sun gods were not advanced civilization coming from another part of our galaxy. These texts and many ancient cultures describe them as coming in flying boats, or in the Vedic tradition, flying machines, and so on. There is many mention of these sun gods coming through time.
Could these early pilots from beyond our world be the ones responsible for sharing the knowledge of this code? Could they actually be tapping its power to propel themselves through the cosmos? This isn't where I thought my research would lead me, and these notions were rocking my world. But Nassim has impressive evidence to back up his theories, and I could see no other rational way advanced math and physics concepts would have been recorded over 3,000 years ago. I sought out one of the most knowledgeable investigators, Dr. Stephen Greer, the founder of the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence. He's conducted hundreds of interviews with top-ranking government and military witnesses.
And so when we talk about extraterrestrial intelligence, we're talking about civilizations that have reached the point of being sentient like we are, but whose technologies and perhaps social capabilities are such that they've been able to become interstellar or interplanetary civilizations. And when you look at the fact that the most conservative estimates are in the Milky Way galaxy that there are at least 10,000 Earth-like planets that have intelligent life on them, and that at least half of them are likely to be as advanced or more than ours. It's almost a certainty that there's intelligent life out there that have mastered the laws of the universe beyond what's currently taught at MIT and Caltech, to be able to transfer through space-time in real time through vast distances of interstellar space. We have over 4,000 cases where these objects have landed on terra firma and left physical evidence. We have over 3,500 pilot cases. We have hundreds of cases, including ones from the highest ranking investigator at the FAA, John Callahan, and numerous other operators where these objects have been tracked on radar going tens of thousands of miles per hour or dematerializing and then reappearing in another point in the sky.
Yes, there have been ET visitation, there have been crashed craft, there have been material and bodies recovered.
We have contact with aliens not originating from some foreign country, but from some other solar system. And I have been a party to that.
There were documents that I have seen that refer to the Roosevelt having several instances of UFO flyovers, and particularly after they took on board nuclear weapons. Now, my SEAL told me, Jordan, this, what have you got in your log? This never happened.
The crew going on duty and the crew coming off duty all saw the UFO just hovering in midair. It was a metallic circular object, and from what I understand, the missiles were all shut down. That means that went dead, and something turned those missiles off.
Now, remember, all this stuff is flying at several thousand miles an hour. So this thing fires a beam of light at the warhead, hits it, and then this thing flies up like this. Meanwhile, we're all going like this, fires another beam of light, goes around like this, we're going like this, fires another beam of light, goes down like this, fires another beam of light, and then flies out the way it came in. And the warhead tumbles out of space. The feeling at the time was that it must have been extraterrestrial. They took the film and they spooled off the part that had the UFO on it, and they took a pair of scissors and cut it off. They put that on a separate reel, they put it in their briefcase, they handed Major Mansman back the rest of the film and said, "Here, I don't need to remind you, Major Mansman, of the severity of a security breach. We'll consider this incident closed."
But who do you tell that you were involved in a UFO incident without them looking at you like you ain't wrapped too tight.
Out of all of the evidence for the existence of UFOs, one extraordinary phenomenon continues to astonish and inspire me. The appearance throughout the world of so-called crop circles. These elaborate designs appear mysteriously swirled into crops of grain in such a way that the stalks are bent over, yet remain alive. More than 5,000 of these patterns have appeared in over 30 countries, most of them in England. The media has led many people, including me at first, to write these crop patterns off as hoaxes, the nighttime work of a few pranksters. Of course, there have been faked versions, but those made by human hands are crude compared to the vast majority of these elegant creations. Could hoaxers have created all 5,000 of these patterns? Could a few people with ropes and boards have created something as complex and beautiful as this one, made in the dead of night in a driving rain and leaving no footprints in the soil? The electromagnetic field over the area where the crop's been laid down to create the image is often electrostatically charged. Some of these areas are littered with strange magnetic particles. One of the most amazing crop designs is not a circle, but a rectangle that seems to be a direct response to a message sent out into space in 1974. The message was a radio signal depicting our planet's location in our solar system and Earth's people, in hopes that it might be received and interpreted by an extraterrestrial intelligence. 27 years later, in 2001, this crop design appeared in England, along with what could be a self-portrait of the sender. This message matches the format of the NASA signal and describes a different solar system from ours, a picture of the sender, non-human DNA, and a microwave antenna they apparently used to communicate, rather than the radio antenna that we used. The antenna symbol had appeared a year earlier in exactly the same field, right next to a working radio wave antenna, like the one NASA used to send out the original signal. NASA continues to officially deny extraterrestrial contact of any kind. And yet, year after year, these spectacular creations appear. So what might these remarkable designs mean? Here are some two-dimensional versions that seem to be revealing the torus in 3D. And here is the vector equilibrium. And the related pattern of 64 that we saw encoded in the arts of so many ancient cultures. When I saw the coherence between the crop circles and the ancient encodings, I thought regardless of whoever created them and wherever they're from, there must be an important purpose to these designs. They're so coherent. I've come to believe that the pattern of the torus and the vector equilibrium, especially in the form of the 64 tetrahedron crystal, is showing us how energy works in the universe so that we can learn to align with it. I believe that they're giving us a model for accessing energy in a clean, safe, and limitless way, and a new means of propulsion. What more important message could there be to get to us, and especially now, from their perspective, as we're beginning to extend our careless reach beyond our planet? I got further confirmation of this notion when I met Dr. Jack Kasher, a former professor of physics at the University of Nebraska, who has also researched UFO phenomena. Presenting at a Sequoia symposium, Dr. Kasher showed a remarkable series of drawings by a woman named Lane Andrews, who claimed to have been invited onto an extraterrestrial spacecraft. I was startled to see her detailed sketches of the toroidal energy field that she said propelled the vehicle and protected the passengers. I subsequently interviewed James Gilliland. James has many hours of UFO footage from his ranch near Mount Adams in Washington state. He also claimed to have gone on board an alien spacecraft. What blew my mind was that he had never met Lane Andrews and had no knowledge of her experience, yet he described a phenomenon that was amazingly similar: numerous ships with spinning rings of light. Could it simply be coincidental that James and Lane described the same torus dynamic, and that both of these people have been harassed extensively by government and military agencies? To some, the idea of UFOs may sound crazy, and yet from another perspective, it is completely plausible.
The Earth is about 4.5 billion years old. That's 4,500 million years old. What if there's another planet that's almost exactly like us? Almost exactly. 4,501 million years old. They're a million years ahead of us. And on a galactic scale, they're almost our twin brothers. So where are we going to be in a million years? We'll have solved all these problems, and there's another way, whether it's wormholes or warping space. There's got to be a way to generate energy so that you can pull it out of the vacuum. And the fact that they're here shows us that they found a way.
This is a major shock to the human system that is in process. I understand why people in our generation, people who aspire to positions of political leadership, etc., never dare go near that question, because it's a worldview challenge. It's a fundamental worldview challenge.
So here we are, a relatively immature species struggling with possible self-destruction. If aligning with the torus does hold the key to a new form of clean, safe energy access, imagine the implications. This could be the most important technology breakthrough of our times. So who wouldn't want to have an energy source that's unlimited and freely available? That turned out to be a key question, and that's what led me down the next rabbit hole. It turns out that scientists as far back as the early 1900s have been developing alternative ways to access electricity without combustion. Nikola Tesla believed he had tapped into what he called radiant energy. Many scientists believe he was accessing what's now called free energy. But before Tesla could finish the project, his financier, banker J.P. Morgan, who had a monopoly on the copper used for electrical lines, recognized how Tesla's invention could transmit electricity without wires. He then shut down Tesla's funding. Tesla's lab was burned down and he was ostracized, all for trying to implement his vision of unlimited energy for everyone. A modern-day inventor, Adam Trombley, was inspired by Tesla's work and by the possibilities of the torus. Trombley built a dynamo, a direct current generator that accessed electrical power right out of the air.
We were trying to demonstrate that by mimicking the magnetic field of a planet and rotating this device, we could actually create a dynamo that would work. And in fact, it did work, and it does work. So when we contemplate nature, when we contemplate Jupiter, or we contemplate a dynamo like the Earth rotating in space, we're basically talking about a magnet which is rotating in space. And the lines of flux of the magnet are pouring down and through in this toroidal pattern of the magnetic field. It's also expanding and contracting. It's breathing. It's taking in the energy of space literally and transforming it. Right here in this toroid, we have enough energy to transform the entire Earth. And that's not just a theoretical statement, it's literally true. To contemplate the implications of this means that every single place on Earth suddenly has power. Every single person on Earth suddenly has power. We have universal abundance.
Trombley had been invited to demonstrate one of his generators at the United Nations and the US Senate. But these events were undermined by the first Bush administration. Then the device itself was taken in a government raid. Trombley's experience isn't unique. Almost every time I found an inventor with a promising new technology in the field of free energy, he told a similar story of suppression. Inventor John Bedini began working with Tesla's theories of radiant energy decades ago and has produced an assortment of battery charging devices that generate more energy than it takes to run them. He announced that he was going to start offering them at low cost. Soon after that, he was attacked in his lab and warned not to produce the devices. For his own safety, he had to let go of marketing free energy. These are all devices from labs I personally visited.
No.
Now, the quality of this footage is obviously poor, and I'm not expecting this to convince you. My point is that being there with these inventors, accompanied by experts, and seeing these new energy devices in operation convinced me that the technology is real. And the implications of that to me are absolutely thrilling. Canadian John Hutchison not only created some free energy batteries, but also used Tesla's theories to counter gravity, to make objects float. This could revolutionize the field of propulsion. His lab was raided and equipment was taken by police and government officials in 1978, 1989, and again in 2000. One of the scientists we were going to interview for this film was Dr. Eugene Malov, an engineer from MIT and Harvard, and editor of Infinite Energy magazine, which covers both theoretical and technological developments in the new energy field. Dr. Malov was mysteriously beaten to death in 2004. If these inventors were all hoaxers and charlatans, I wondered, why are they being suppressed so consistently and so brutally? I asked free energy inventor Adam Trombley why he thought this technology was being suppressed, and if the UFO phenomenon was related.
We've had major military people at great risk to themselves say, yes, these things are real. Why do you think the military-industrial complex doesn't want that statement to be made? Because you start thinking about what kind of technology is behind that. That's the bottom line. The suppression of UFO phenomena is hand in hand with the suppression of so-called free energy.
The energy is extracted from the fabric of the space around us, which means it cannot be metered. That is a direct threat to the single largest industry in the world, energy. It's goodbye ExxonMobil, goodbye oil, goodbye coal, goodbye linear transmission of electricity through power lines, all that gone. Unfortunately, it's someone's $200 trillion piggy bank. The proven oil and gas and coal reserves are worth north of $200 trillion. This information coming out would completely change geopolitical power more than anything since, well, in recorded human history. And it would happen in a generation.
I started to examine the breakthrough solutions, and much to my surprise, these concepts have been proven in hundreds of laboratories throughout the world, and yet they have not really seen the light of day.
Rather than smashing things together and trying to control the explosion, these new technologies rely on blending, of dancing with what naturally is. The common denominator of all the free energy devices I've seen is that they mimic in one way or another the torus energy shape. You don't have to believe in free energy technology to be concerned about the repression of ideas and inventions. I found myself thinking, what better way to justify our dependence on oil, coal, nuclear, and other dangerous and dirty technologies than to claim there are no better, cheaper alternatives? It was my beloved wife and creative partner, Kimberly, who kept bringing me back to the human implications of my scientific research.
For me, as intriguing as the torus and ETs and free energy are, the most compelling question was, would understanding these things really help alleviate human suffering in any way? And it turns out it can. So much of the pain on the planet has to do with the lack of access to energy. Can you stay warm? Can you get food and water? Can you get hospital care? All that has to do with energy access. If there is a fundamental pattern, which makes sense to me that evolution would be efficient in that way, and we can align with that pattern to create new technologies that will solve these problems, then it's worth it to me to open my mind to these socially taboo subjects.
If the new energy technologies were to be set free worldwide, the change would be profound. It would affect everybody. It would be applicable everywhere. These technologies are absolutely the most important thing that's happened in the history of the world.
So given the stakes, I decided to ask who's benefiting from suppressing scientific research? Whose wealth and power are threatened by access to clean, free energy? Who has a motive to set up a world where so few have so much and so many have so little? As an independent researcher, I followed one of the cardinal rules of investigative journalism. If a story doesn't make sense, follow the money.
That any civilization that's going faster than the speed of light, their entire communication and energy systems, in fact their entire spacecraft, crosses out of linear space-time into this non-local aspect of the cosmos, and their communication systems must use this nature of consciousness in order to be effective. That conscious mind, because of its nature, is omnipresent. It means that the mind itself is always everywhere. And it's sort of like what Erwin Schrödinger said, who was the father of particle wave theory that became quantum mechanics. He said the total number of minds in the universe is one. That is, it's a singularity. And so as you sit listening to this interview, think about the fact that you're hearing the words, but the conscious mind that's hearing them is this one light of consciousness that's shining within all people, within all beings, but also within all things, and it's an omnipresent field of conscious intelligence. And that's what we're talking about, and the experience of it and then the utilization of it very specifically with technologies and techniques we've developed is very key, because we have found, and we've had this confirmed by military and top secret people who've worked in studying the extraterrestrial spacecraft that have been retrieved over the years, that they have found that in fact their technologies interface directly from thought to the machine. So it's not even about touching some dials, it's about they think and there's an actuation of that command in the spacecraft for guidance or for traveling through space. Very, very advanced technologies, and we're going to get into that and why it's so important that we understand this. When we look at this whole question of how extraterrestrial civilizations might choose to communicate with us, we have to kind of get out of our anthropocentric, human-centered view of things that are locked into early 21st century technologies, because we're dealing with civilizations that are hundreds of thousands to perhaps millions of years more developed than we are. By virtue of the fact that they're traveling easily through interstellar distances, they're not going to be using, Exxon Jet A fuel. They're not going to be using fossil fuel energy systems. They're not going to be using electromagnetic communication systems that go at the speed of light, because it would be impossible to communicate through the distances of interstellar space. So you have to really begin to open the mind scientifically and analyze and question, how then might they communicate? How then might they interact? And it'll be in, as Dr. J. Allen Hynek said, who was initially an Air Force astronomer debunker of all this and later became a big advocate of it. He said it's just a lot of high strangeness, and yet it makes total sense when you begin to look at it from the point of view of the vastness of space and the fact that linear communication and linear travel is just too slow. You can't go interstellar at anything at the speed of light or lower, nor can you communicate. So when you begin to accept that as a fact and begin to then think, well, what then might be the various manifestations of a higher extraterrestrial civilization's technologies and how they might choose to interact and communicate, you really go beyond what I call the crossing point of light. You go beyond this light barrier, like we went beyond the sound barrier back in whenever it was, the 40s, 50s. I can't remember when we broke the sound barrier with a jet. But now we're talking about going past the light barrier. And the crossing point of light is when you begin to realize that most of what exists in the cosmos is resonating at frequencies beyond the speed of light, and that includes what some call the whole astral field energies and etheric, but also thought, consciousness, and all of that. And that any civilization that can go from some star system to here has had to figure that out, and has also had to make it a science and make it something that actually can be routinely used, and that's what we're dealing with. And so that's why, so for some people, they think I've taken a kind of a left turn into consciousness studies and higher states of consciousness with the work that we're doing with our diplomatic effort with these advanced civilizations. I point out that it's actually the foundation of our contact work and of the foundation of universal peace and of communication and diplomacy is to understand this. And if you can't understand it, then you're going to be very, very limited in understanding all the ways that these advanced interstellar civilizations might interact with us or may choose to, because they don't necessarily have to be using early 21st century Earth technologies. Why would they, any more than we're using smoke signals to communicate from Los Angeles to New York? I mean, we're not using smoke signals anymore. So I think that we have to be open-minded about this, and I think that this thing opens this whole question then, how do we develop that ability? And we're going to talk about that in the next half hour or so, is that, how do we get from understanding this sort of as a grasp or an intellectual understanding to then being able to practice it? And this is a really big part of what we'd like to share with the listeners at the World Puja Network, is this understanding that everybody has within them the entirety of the universe folded. I'm reminded by a Persian mystic that said, thinkest thyself a puny form when within thee the universe is folded. And that's a literal statement that because of the nature of the conscious mind within you, everyone has the entire cosmos folded within them and accessible to them through the nature of this non-local, unbounded component of mind. And no one is without that. If you're a human being, you have it within you. It's a matter of awakening to it and beginning to know how to utilize it, and then specifically how to utilize it for interstellar civilization communication, which is really very important, because we're at a time now where, since we know we're being visited by various extraterrestrial civilizations, and that they are wanting to reach out to humanity, but the only answer they've gotten back from our governments have been to be shot at, shot down, and also lied to the public about. So what we're trying to do at CSETI.org is to say, look, let's have a citizens diplomacy effort, but the foundation for that is the understanding and experience of this higher state of conscious mind that's within all of us.
Another thing that about the ETs, and you talk about just awakening to our own innate capabilities that we don't even know we've had, and one of them is being able to see the ETs and their craft in their astral form. And these are things that are there, and anyone could see them, but most people don't use their inner vision well enough, and we've developed that skill, and you just people would be amazed at the things that we see in the astral form, which is how the ETs and their craft often have to appear these days because our weapons technologies now are so sophisticated that it's dangerous for them to come in materialized form.
Yeah, we often will see these phases between being completely materialized and solid and then dematerializing. And you understand that the individual, us as individuals, are all sort of fountains or focal points or entry points for this unbounded being, the great being, the unbounded mind that's within us. And by using this mantra meditation, which is something we now have put onto this 2-set CD that people can get at disclosureproject.org, you can learn to do this, and what happens is that you will find that then you're ready to go to the next step, and that is to go into the remote viewing mode and to be able to see remote planets or starships or ET vehicles that might even be around Earth, and invite them in a spirit of peace to wherever you are, assuming you're out someplace that's private. You're not going to pull them into your, right in the middle of the city. But although that's happened as well, I might add. We've had people experiment with this, and they've had these amazing sightings right in their backyard. But I think that the reason this is so powerful is not so much so that people can see an ET craft. It's because by doing this, it creates this resonant field, this morphogenic resonant field that begins to affect everyone on the Earth and the future of the Earth, and manifest this time of universal peace, which is the only possible future. Everyone gets all wrapped up in the current with the state of the world. And what I point out is that a lot of that noise is just the death throes of an old yuga, an old era that's passing away in front of our eyes. But what we are having to do is create the foundation for a new civilization, one that is universally at peace, going into space peacefully, that lets the truth be known about all these things, and also allows these wonderful new energy and propulsion technologies to be used for peaceful and not military purposes, so that we can have free energy, no pollution, and have abundance for all the world's children, so that there's not just a few people, 20% or so of the world doing well, and the other 80% in terrible poverty with, barely knowing, where the next meal's coming from, if that. So I think that all of this is very connected, and it happens first on the level of thought and consciousness.
What I really love about the mantra having a tone or tune is that it sticks in your head, like usually some really lame radio commercial or something, ditty would stick in your head, and instead you've got a mantra in your head. It's very calming, but I always think, just imagine if people all over the world had that mantra running through their minds, what a nicer world we'd have.
Well, and it's a very powerful technique for transcendence, for going into this unbounded state of awareness. and as a meditation technique, it's very powerful. And what I point out is that what we're doing with CSETI is, you know, where most people think the ending of the process is the beginning for us. In other words, the arrival at the state of pure mind and samadhi, then we go into the remote viewing mode, and then from there, after we see and remote view these ET civilizations or spacecraft, then we vector them or guide them into our location by a series of imaging, which I call coherent thought sequencing, which is in a meditation set that is at disclosureproject.org. And the purpose of that is so that we can actually make open, peaceful contact. And what's amazing is that if people will do it with a pure heart, with an open mind, without fear, and in a state of really wanting to manifest this state of this universal peace, what's beautiful about it is that we have never been disappointed. I mean, we do this 4 or 5 weeks out of the year where we go, sometimes 6 weeks out of the year where we go all over with groups of ranging from 25 to 50 people, and we have never been disappointed. And I'm convinced that these extraterrestrial civilizations are really eagerly awaiting more and more people. Imagine if millions of people started understanding this and doing it. Well, there's no power on Earth, there's no government on Earth who could then stop it, because it's just not able to be stopped when enough people do it with that intent. We have within us this universal field of consciousness, and we can develop it, and how that it can then be an applied consciousness science where we can use it for the good. We can use it for the transformation of the Earth. We can use it for making peaceful contact with these visitors, and we can create this wonderful time of universal peace for this planet. This is something that is not a question of if it's going to happen. The only question is when and how and who. And I always say people have misinterpreted this thing where they say, well, many are called but few are chosen. I don't think it's that at all. I think it's many are called but few choose to answer the call. That's the correct translation. And so people have to realize this is a planet of free will. We have to choose to be at service for something this important and this far-reaching. But if we do, we'll just be delighted with the kind of wonderful and amazing things that will happen not only in our lives, but in the world. And we're seeing this now. As I mentioned, we've been modeling this open contact with visitors for 18 years, and now we have a major G7 country that has, in the last year and a half, been communicating with us through their Ministry of Defense to set up these contacts with these visitors so that can then be all filmed and then it can be disclosed to the world.
Mr. Greer.
Well, on that note, it reminds me of a conversation I had with some people at the CIA, and there's a term that's used there, and you'll forgive my vernacular, where much of this subject is referred to as WSFM. Sounds like a radio station. It means weird science and frickin' magic. And that is the term that's used at the CIA and other places to describe some of this. And I think that what we have to understand is that if you're dealing with, and I do want to go into this because this is part of the summary and brief I provided in the Obama briefing and elsewhere. If you're dealing with civilizations that are 10 to the 6th to 10 to the 7th years, hundreds of thousands to millions of years, technologically more developed than we are, every manifestation of their technology would look like magic to us. For example, if you were to go back to the time of Thomas Jefferson and show them an iPhone, or worse, to Salem, Massachusetts, you'd be burned at the stake as a witch, because everything would be absolutely look like magic. So I think that we have to have a certain amount of humility in realizing that we're dealing with a universe that is vast and infinite, that in our own galaxy alone, which has 100 billion star systems, the same number of stars that we have as we have neurons in our brain, interestingly, that we're dealing with civilizations just in our own galaxy, which is one of billions, that are able to go through interstellar space. Now, I want to touch on this for a moment because it deals with a little bit that Linda referred to in terms of transdimensional or other dimensions. And the technologies and the sciences dealing with this subject are what we have termed transdimensional interstellar, TDIS. And this refers to very advanced sciences and technologies where there is a nexus between electromagnetism and the magnetic field, gravitational forces in three-dimensional space and time, and what Dr. John at Princeton in the engineering lab began to prove is the science of consciousness, which was actually an issue that I did talk a fair amount with Lawrence Rockefeller about. Now, a lot of people say, well, this gets into the deep end of the pool very quickly, and in fact it does. But I think that it's important to understand that if you're dealing with civilizations that have gotten here, and that's what we're dealing with, you're not dealing with something that can go just straight through space at the speed of light even, because the speed of light is too slow. And I remember when I was having dinner with CIA Director Woolsey and his wife, and actually the really most insightful question came from Dr. Woolsey, who at the time was Chief Operating Officer of the National Academy of Sciences. And she said, what I want to know is, how are these civilizations communicating across the vastness of space? Because your cell phone and radio waves are going at the speed of light. And I said, yes, that's just too slow. Speed of light is way too slow. And I had I had a gut check. I said, do I tell her the truth and lose all credibility as a scientist and a doctor? Or do I tell her something that sounds scientific, but that's really not true? And ever since then, I have vowed that if someone is intelligent enough to ask the question, I will provide the answer as truthfully as I can. So I turned to her and I said, well, Dr. Woolsey, it's like this. It turns out thinking is the best way to travel. And the speed of thought is not quantifiable. However, when you start getting into the new physics that have been done, where you have the ability to teleport across vast distances instantly, and this has been done with particles, but we're talking about civilizations that can do it with entire spacecraft and occupants. You're dealing with an entirely new physics. But their communication devices and their own innate abilities allow for thought-actuated events. And I know Dr. Wood may mention this, that he discovered when he was doing some work for old man McDonald of McDonnell Douglas, that he looked into some cases where in some meetings with these ETs involved a little box, and there was a direct thought communication, but it was also being facilitated through electronics. And this is something that we call technology-assisted consciousness and thought. And this is a very specific area of study that I've really devoted about 22 years to, which may be beyond the scope of this hearing. But I think that in terms of just bringing this issue around, there are so many aspects of it that are very exciting from the point of view of science, technology, and understanding the universe and ourselves. And also, who are we? And where did we come from? And how is it that we exist in this cosmos that is and I agree with Edgar Mitchell on this, that is a conscious quantum hologram that is awake and that we are all part of, and that mind itself is the ultimate final frontier, not space, but consciousness and mind. Now, I know that Lawrence Rockefeller was very interested in these things because I had conversations with him also, but one of the things that I found when I was working with these folks is that there's a saying in American business, everyone wants to be first to be second. And so in this case, there's so many people who have had an interest in this, but they want to hold back and not speak the whole truth about it. But I think we need to be able to liberate ourselves to speak the truth. And it involves many, many complex issues, part of which has been touched on in the last 15 or 20 minutes. One thing I also want to point out is that if we're being visited by advanced civilizations, and it's our assessment that certainly we are, who is handling that relationship? Do we cede that management to the military-industrial complex, and what are the consequences of doing so? Think about this very carefully. I remember doing a meeting with the Boutros-Ghali family, with the UN Secretary General, his wife Leah Ghali, and we were talking about this. And Leah Ghali turned to me and she said, "Dr. Greer, we need you to do this now. We need you to do." I said, "I'm a country doctor in North Carolina rattling around in an emergency department. You're the head of the world." She says, "No, we can't. It's too dangerous for Boutros." I'm quoting. And then I remember talking to this wonderful senator, Claiborne Pell, who was mentioned earlier, and I was speaking with him, and I would never have gone to college if not for a Pell Grant, because I was very, very, very poor. Grew up in North Carolina, had no resources, put myself through the last years of high school and college and med school, but, I mean, really poor. And most people don't know that, but what I found when I was talking to Senator Pell, who was chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, and I was at a meeting with Edgar Mitchell and some other folks, and I looked at him, and he said, "Dr. Greer, I have never been given any information on this, even though I have inquired through any official channels." And I said, "Yes, sir, what a shame, because you, the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, have been denied the responsibility of dealing with the ultimate foreign relations issue." And I pointed to the stars above our heads. And he looked at me through those hornworm grasses and said, "Well, you know, Dr. Greer, you may be right." I said, "Well, I am." And I said, "Well, what a shame." So I think this is another dimension. There's the science and technology part of it, but there's the part of it about relationships. And we are not alone in the universe. And we need to have a situation on this planet where our higher nature, our better angels, folks like Senator Pell and others who would approach this in an enlightened way, could reach out and form what has begun to be discussed in the French government that I referred to earlier in this Ministry of Defense memo to me, a peaceful interplanetary, interstellar diplomatic initiative. And to be honest with you, that's how I first got involved with this, was to establish such an effort, which we are doing as a citizens' diplomatic effort. But in the meanwhile, I got diverted into this morass of the national security state because I felt that our leaders need to know, and more importantly, the public need to know. And we need to then figure out how we're going to advance. And in the summary I did for the President, there are a number of action points, and one of them is to appoint internationally a high-level committee of folks who could go out and make a peaceful contact that is not militarized, that is not covert, that is not being run by the national security state, but is being done on behalf of all of us, the children of Earth.
Mr. Bartlett.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your testimony very much. We have a free press, so-called free press.
Theoretically, yes.
There are advantages and disadvantages of a free press. They reported the Boston bombing. There will very likely be copycat things because that was reported. Where the press is controlled, that would not be reported, so there would be no copycat. So there are some disadvantages to a free press. Where is the press in all of this? If, in fact, there is a story to be told here, why isn't the press telling that story?
Well, I can...
They seem to be, if there's a cover-up, do they not seem to be complicit in that cover-up?
Yes. Well, can I comment on that?
By control from above.
I think this is a really central issue. And I actually, over my 22 years of being deeply involved with this at various levels, I have concluded that the secrecy is very much involving the fact that on certain issues we do not have a free press any more than we have a free market economy. And I think that this is a serious problem. And I have a document that will be in the materials that I'm providing for the committee that is a 1991 CIA document where it talks about the fact that they have folks at all the major media outlets, wire services, news magazines, television networks, to change, alter, or delay and stop stories that they would like to see stopped. Now, this was released briefly and then reclassified. It was under the first President Bush term. And this is not a contested CIA document. What that means is is that on certain issues, this will be absolutely, there will be an intervention. And we saw this happen with the 2001 event at this National Press Club disclosure launch 12 years ago almost today, on May 9th of 2001. And one of the people I dealt with, Bob Schwartz, who was on the board of Time Life that later became AOL, Time Warner, and CNN, the whole conglomerate, he told me that he was very good friends with Mike Wallace, and he had given him a lot of these documents that we had, and Mike Wallace wanted to do this story at 60 Minutes. And the corporate CBS, and I think at the time was controlled by Westinghouse, a big defense contractor, did not permit him to do the story. Ira Rosen, who was at ABC News executive producer for 2020 and Primetime Live, he came to my home in Virginia, out near Thomas Jefferson's home, ironically, and I gave him 35 digital hours of top secret witness testimony and many documents. And he said, this, if true, is the biggest story ever. I want to do this story. I said, well, I'll cooperate fully. He had gotten his Emmy working with Mike Wallace at 60 Minutes, where he has returned. And I said, I don't think you'll be allowed to do this story. And Ira Rosen said, oh, yes, I'm the executive producer of these shows. I can do it. And I said, okay. Well, 2 weeks later, he called me up. And he said, Dr. Greer, they won't let me do this story. I said, Ira, who are they? And he said, Dr. Greer, you know who they are. Now, I could tell you probably 100 stories like that. And this becomes very worrisome. Here we are in the National Press Club, and we have a lot of enormously important information. And you know, in the New York Times, if you have 3 confirmed sources for a controversial story, they can run with it. Here, the Disclosure Project, which I founded some years ago, it was first Project Starlight when I began to work with Lawrence Rockefeller. We now have over 500. Many of them, I have the names of them and they can be subpoenaed. Some of them, about 100 of them, we have on digital videotape. Why isn't this a story? And I think that this becomes a very important question in a democracy. You know, if you have the larger media not covering something that 50–60% of the public believe is true, and there's an enormous amount of data, 4,000 landing cases, the Cometa report where they documented the landing in Provence of a craft, the Bentwaters case where a craft landed at RAF Bentwaters and left physical trace that has been confirmed by the Ministry of Defense. We have all this hard data and information. We have radar traces of these objects moving. We have pilot cases. We have over 3,500 pilot reports in our archives. This isn't a story. How can that be? Now there's another reason, the ha-ha factor. I have met with so many senior people in government who say, I am so interested in this, but don't let anyone know that I'm interested. And the reason for it, I think, you know, you could be gay and have 5 wives and do whatever. I mean, you could do anything and be out of the closet on it, and it would be no problem. But this subject, whoa, watch out, because your career is on the line, as mine was. Okay. Now, I think that what you find is that the social opprobrium, it's an appropriate term, attached to this issue was launched in 1953. We have a CIA document that describes their attempts to debunk and ridicule the subject, but also, very important, to engage Disney Studios to make cartoons and movies about it that would marginalize the subject. This is a CIA document, little green men, ha, 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 ha. So that has worked, and there's an Air Force major, George Filer, who I know, he may be here, who said, look, the secrecy really has been created mainly through the force of just ridicule. People don't want to be made a laughingstock. And I think that fear of ridicule by one's peerage, whether you're a senator or a doctor or a university professor, is a very hard thing to overcome once the counterintelligence people have done their business, and they have on this. And it is propaganda. There is very serious information and intelligence, and I think that we have to figure out how do we get around the truth embargo, as Steve calls it. In reality, we're sort of in, it's not just the government doing the embargo, it's we are doing the embargo because we have been brainwashed to laugh at this issue instead of look at it in a very serious, scientific, in-depth, and honest and truthful way.
Can you come to any other conclusion as a body that our nation is essentially ruled by a military junta? Can you come to any other conclusion based upon all the statements that have been made?
Well, I think it's not just military. I think it's a large macroeconomic and financial system. So it's the military, industrial, corporate, financial complex. And I'm not against corporations. However, as Jefferson said, the unchecked power of a corporation. And see, if our budget is $3.8 trillion, but we're talking about something that, if it's disclosed, would threaten the privately owned interests in the oil, gas, coal, utility industries that are estimated in the multi-hundred trillions of dollars, what tail is wagging the dog of our democracy? And that's the big question.
It is sort of a, I shouldn't use the expression rats chasing rats, but maybe that's not such a bad
Well, it's a little bit, but you know,
example.
here's the nice thing about the new media. We have a world now where we can stream. The Huffington Post,
that's what I was gonna
the
get
Huffington
into.
Post
Right.
did an article about the film Sirius that's just been released that's based on our work. It had like 4 million people look at it. I think that we can do a lot that we couldn't have done 12 years ago, 5 years ago with the new media and the people's media. That's one thing. The other is that I want to put out a call for other witnesses from inside the military, intelligence, and corporate world to come forward, but who will come forward rank, serial number, name, actionable intelligence. One thing I want to comment on, there is a confusion that's been in the room a little bit today between access and control. Now, I just want to say that I have been able to provide actionable intelligence to where there would be access, but you don't necessarily have control. And I think we have to understand the difference for the president and for even some of these senior military officials that I've met with and continue to meet with. There is a huge problem there. And this is something that does need to be fixed. The media is one part, the public is one part. I think we have to get all these components going. But something that needs to be looked at from a constitutional and national security point of view is that you cannot have information like this being withheld from the commander-in-chief and senior people like the Defense Intelligence Agency head or the CIA director, which we know is going on.
Español, English, Deutsch. Normalmente produzco solo videos en inglés y español. Normally I produce only videos in English and Spanish. Normalerweise produziere ich nur Videos en English und Spanish. Pero hoy voy a hacer otra excepción y traducirlo también en alemán. But today I make another exception and translate it into German too. Aber heute werde ich nochmal eine Ausnahme machen und es auch in Deutsch übersetzen. Ya algunas semanas tengo escrito en mi lista de tareas por hacer de traducir el video #BTC4. Now already some weeks ago I have written on my to-do list to translate the video BTC4, #BTC4. Schon seit ein paar Wochen habe ich auf meiner To-Do-Liste geschrieben, den Video BTC4 in Deutsch zu übersetzen. Estoy segura que esta idea puede ayudar a mucha gente económicamente. I'm sure that this can help many people economically. Ich bin sicher, dass diese Idee vielen Leuten finanziell helfen kann. Y da motivación para aprender Bitcoin. And give motivation to learn about Bitcoin. Und Motivation geben, um über Bitcoin zu lernen. En este momento el precio de Bitcoin es muy bajo, económico. At the moment the price of Bitcoin is very low, economic. Im Moment ist der Preis von Bitcoin sehr tief. Sería el momento ideal para invertir. Hoy es el 15 de abril 2015. Would be the ideal moment to invest. Today is April 15th, 2015. Es wäre der ideale Moment zu investieren. Heute ist der 15. April 2015. El 27 de marzo 2015 he publicado en mi canal de YouTube Vanos Enigma el primer video sobre hashtag BTC4 explicando cómo me vino esta idea. On March 27th of 2015, I published the first video about hashtag BTC4 in my channel YouTube Vanos Enigma, explaining how I got the idea. Am 27. März 2015 habe ich in meinem YouTube-Channel Vanos Enigma den ersten Video über Hashtag BTC4 veröffentlicht und erklärt, wie ich diese Idee bekommen habe. La idea consiste principalmente en lo siguiente. The idea mainly consists in the following. Die Idee besteht hauptsächlich in folgendem. Imprimir direcciones de Bitcoin en papel, 10 o mínimo 10 o mejor 100. To print Bitcoin directions in paper, at least 10 or better 100. Bitcoin Adressen in Papier ausdrucken, Minimum 10 oder besser gleich 100. Y luego poner en cada dirección de Bitcoin una pequeña cantidad de Bitcoin. And then put in every Bitcoin direction a little amount of Bitcoin. Und dann in jede Bitcoin-Adresse eine kleine Summe von Bitcoin transferieren. Y la próxima vez, cuando otra vez ves una persona por la calle pidiendo dinero, and the next time you see again a person begging for money on the street, und das nächste Mal, wenn du wieder eine Person auf der Straße betteln siehst, y para tus amigos y amigas, and for your friends of course, und für deine Freunde natürlich, o tal vez de propina en un restaurante, or maybe a tip in a restaurant, oder Trinkgeld im Restaurant. Bueno, a la hora de imprimir también copiar y guardar las llaves privadas de Bitcoin, de direcciones de Bitcoin. When you print the Bitcoin addresses, copy and save the private keys of the Bitcoin addresses, of course. Wenn man die Bitcoin-Adressen druckt, auch die privaten Schlüssel, Bitcoin-Address-Schlüsseln kopieren und speichern. Y a la hora de distribuir las direcciones de Bitcoin, escribir la fecha, por ejemplo, hoy es el 15 de abril 2015, escribir la fecha más plus 4 años, igual 15 de abril 2019. And then in the moment when you distribute the Bitcoin addresses, you write the date, for example, today, April 15th, 2015, plus 4 years is April 15th, 2019. Und dann in dem Moment, wenn man die Bitcoin-Adressen verteilt, auf das Papier schreiben, das heutige Datum, zum Beispiel 15. April 2015, plus 4 Jahre ist gleich 15.04.2019. Luego vas a explicar a la gente, mira, esta es la llave privada, tú y yo la tengo, la tienes. Si no quitas, transfieres este dinero de Bitcoin en estos 4 años, yo lo vuelvo a tener o sacar. Then you explain to the people, look, this is the private key. I have it and you have it. If you don't take this money, Bitcoin, out of this account, I will take it out in these 4 years, at the end of these 4 years. Und dann erklärst du den Leuten, schau, das ist der private Schlüssel. Ich und du haben diesen privaten Schlüssel, Bitcoin-Schlüssel. Wenn du bis Ende dieser 4 Jahre das Geld Bitcoin nicht raustust, transfer, dann hole ich es zurück. De esta forma das más motivación a la gente para empezar a aprender cómo funciona Bitcoin. This way you give more motivation to the people to learn how the technology of Bitcoin functions. Auf diese Weise gibst du mehr Motivation den Leuten zu lernen, wie die Technologie von Bitcoin funktioniert. En mi video antiguo he explicado cómo he tomado la decisión de los 4 años. In my old video, I explained how I made the decision for the 4 years. In meinem Originalvideo habe ich erklärt, wie ich die Entscheidung getroffen habe mit den 4 Jahren. A continuación voy a pegar este video. Now later I will paste this video. Im Anschluss werde ich diesen Video ankleben. En este momento el precio de Bitcoin es muy económico. At the moment the price of Bitcoin is very cheap. Pero casi todo el mundo tiene muy poco dinero para invertir. But almost everybody has very little money to invest. Debería decir que esta idea me vino hoy especialmente cuando vi otra vez una chica ahí pidiendo dinero por la calle. Actually, I must say first, this idea today I got especially when I saw again one girl begging for money in the streets. Me gustaría ayudar, pero yo tampoco me sobra mucho el dinero. I would really like to help everybody, but I don't have either too much money. And así que me vino la siguiente idea. So I got the following idea. Es más bien un juego. It's rather a game. Lo que es muy importante, elegir un monedero de Bitcoin que solo tú misma tienes la llave privada. What is very important to choose Bitcoin wallet company which you only possess the private key. For example, blockchain.info. Por ejemplo, la empresa blockchain.info. Luego, imprimir en papel la llave privada y también guardarlo tú mismo. Then to print in paper the private key and of course save for yourself that private key. Bueno, ya estamos imprimiendo, imprime por lo menos 10. So now we are already printing, so at least print 10 directions, 10 direcciones. Luego pones algo de Bitcoin, una cantidad, lo que te da la gana en esta dirección. Then you put some Bitcoin, the amount, whatever you want, and that in these directions. Y la próxima vez que sales de casa ya tienes algo que dar a los que están ahí pidiendo por la calle. And the next time you go out of the house, you have already something to give for these people who are begging on the streets. Y por ejemplo, y claro, para tus amigos, amigas, and for your friends, of course. Eso da motivación a la gente para aprender Bitcoin y this gives motivation for the people to learn about Bitcoin. Y la parte del juego consiste en lo siguiente, and the game part consists in the following. Explicas a la gente, mira, esta es la clave privada, que es la clave secreta. You explain to the people, look, this is the private key, which must be secret. And you have it, and me, and explicas, esa persona y yo mismo la tiene. Y antes pensaba en 5 años, pero luego cambié un poco de idea de hasta 4 años. First I thought of 5 years, but then I changed my opinion to 4 years, later explain. Después lo explico por qué. Les dices, mira, tienes 4 años para poner esta cantidad de Bitcoin a otra dirección. Si no lo has quitado después de 4 años, yo lo quito. So you explain them, you have 4 years to take these Bitcoin out of this direction, of this secret key direction. If you don't do it, I do it after these 4 years, so you lose this. That's this part of the game, es la parte del juego. He creado este hashtag BTC4 para hacerlo un poco popular. I created this hashtag BTC4 to make it a little popular. Antes pensaba en 5 años, pero luego cambié a 4 porque te has dado cuenta que en Los Simpson la gente tiene 4 dedos y solo Dios tiene 5 dedos. First, I thought of 5 years, but then I changed my mind to 4 years. Did you notice that in The Simpsons, people have 4 fingers and only God has 5 fingers? I'll show some pictures. Voy a enseñar algunas imágenes de Los Simpsons, de los manos y dedos de Simpsons. Some pictures of the hands and fingers of Simpsons. Pero antes quiero recordar que es muy probable que en también 4 o 5 en los próximos años el valor de Bitcoin puede subir mucho. Just want to remember before that the price of Bitcoin, the value of Bitcoin can rise very much in these next years. Así que si solo pones una cantidad pequeña, más tarde puede ser de gran ayuda. Even if you just put a little small amount, later it can be big help. No solo para, bueno, es un juego. Si la persona lo quita antes de 4 años, es para esta persona, si no, es para ti, si te recuerdas y guardas bien la llave privada. So this is the game part. If the person takes the money out, it's for that person. But if they forget it after these 4 years, you can take it out. And it can be really...
Bueno, imprimir también la llave pública y la llave privada. Y si, por ejemplo, okay, first translate. Print not just the private key, but also the public key. Así que si, por ejemplo, explicas a la gente, mira, si alguna persona quiere enviarte Bitcoin, pero tú no tienes ninguna dirección, así que puedes dar esta llave pública a la persona. Mira, muy bien, la llave pública, no la llave secreta. Das a esa persona o cualquier persona y te pueden enviar Bitcoin a esa dirección. So remember, the public key you can give to anybody, and if somebody wants to send you some Bitcoin and this person doesn't have any, so you have already this public address where they can send you Bitcoin.